Welcome to our Career Services Resume webinar. We are so glad that you are joining us this evening for this professional development session. My name is Kelsey Richardson, and I'm Career Advisor here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And this is Refresh Your Resume webinar, because obviously the resume is such an important part of your credentials that you present to employers, and we want to make sure that you have the best resume possible. So again, I'm really glad that you joined us this evening. And we also have assistance this evening from our Data and Administrative Coordinator in Career Services, Nikita Cassidy. So thank you, Nikita, for helping support us this evening as well. So now what I want to do is I want to go over the agenda of what we're going to cover this evening. So we are going to be going over first what I call Resume 101, which is the formats and designs of resumes. And then we're going to be talking about content and word choice. And just kind of overall Resume 101 of how to get your resumes in the best shape. And then after we discuss resumes, we're going to be just touching on the supplemental documents. And those supplemental documents include cover letters, follow-up thank you letters, the references document, online applications and profiles, and then we have time at the end for Q&A. So definitely make sure that you put any questions that you have in our chat, and then I will get to as many questions as I can at the end of the webinar, so that we can address whatever issues are specifically on your mind that we did not cover, in our general presentation. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So for resume formats and designs. So the most common resume format is the reverse chronological format. And then the functional format is the other one that is often used. And there are different reasons to use reverse chronological versus functional, and we'll talk about that. But we'll also touch on fonts and the fact that it's really to have your resume be consistent and clean. Okay, so in terms of the reverse chronological and the functional format, so for reverse chronological, that's when your experience is listed in order from most recent to least recent. And I would bet that I would say probably about 90% of your resumes of everyone attending this evening has their resume in the reverse chronological format, because it does tend to be the favorite of most employers. It's really easy for them to read because your experience is listed in order like that, so they can do a quick read and see where you've been, what you've done there. It focuses on your job titles and the organizations where you've worked, and it highlights your career progression. If you've been with particular employers for a period of time, employer loyalty is highlighted, and it also shows your recent accomplishments through your bullet points of how you describe your responsibilities on your resume. Then the functional format is it's different because it focuses more on your qualifications, skill set, and achievements. So it's de-emphasizing the actually like the responsibilities that you had, or your career progression. And the reasons that you might want to de-emphasize that are because, like, if you have been a career changer, or you're in the process of doing a career change and your experience is not as relevant to the kinds of jobs that you're going to be going for, then you might want to consider a functional format. If you don't have much work experience, so there isn't a lot to emphasize, in terms of career progression, that's another reason you might want to be focusing more on like your education and your qualifications and use this functional format. And then another reason could also be if you're re-entering the workforce after a lengthy absence, you also might consider using this functional format. And I have sample documents that I'm going to be referring to during this webinar. And you're going to receive a copy of the sample documents, as well as a copy of this PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar afterwards as a follow-up. So, within the next few days, I would say you would receive that. So you'll definitely be able to refer back to these materials. Okay, so I don't want anybody feeling like they need to furiously take any notes. Okay. Okay, so in terms of your resume format, so getting started. Now, if you're about to refresh your resume, usually I say, please do not use a template. It's not a hard and fast rule. I mean, if there's a template that you really are attached to, that you really like and you want to use, of course, you can use it. But the reason I say it's best to not use templates is because templates are not as flexible as Microsoft Word is. And if you do your resume, you start from scratch in Microsoft Word, it just allows you the ultimate flexibility when you need to update it going forward. And let's face it, our resumes are documents that we always need to update. It's one of those evolving documents as you gain more experience and you add more responsibilities to what you're doing in the workforce. So it's really important to have that flexibility. So that's my recommendation, is go with Microsoft Word, okay? In terms of fonts, you usually want to keep your font size between 10 point and 12 point. And that's going to depend on which font you choose, because some fonts appear larger than others, and you're going to be trying to manage your space well, so you'll have to visually kind of eye it and see what tends to work best. And you want to make sure you're using the same font throughout the document. Don't switch fonts. It doesn't look as professional or as consistent if you switch fonts. So just make sure you're consistent with your font. And usually in terms of font choice of which font you're going to use, simpler tends to be better. So using, ones that are like Times New Roman, Arial, Verdana, Tahoma, those are often common choices for really good fonts to use for your resume, because they tend to have a professional look to them. They kind of look crisp and, they're easy to read, all of that. You don't want to make a font choice like Comic Sans, for instance, if anyone's familiar with that font, because that font is kind of a little bit more like cartoony and creative and hard to read. So, so I would stick with, one of these or one that's similar to one of these. And you also usually want to go with black only and not use color on your resume. And again, let me just say this now about resumes, that it's not like an exact science, as I'm sure everyone knows. It's like math, where 2 + 2 is 4. When it comes to resumes, you'll get all kinds of different opinions. If you did any searches on the web, there are lots of experts out there that will have opposing opinions on what's best. But so I'm just going to give you advice from a lot of the employers that I've worked with over the years, and what they've told me tends to work for them in terms of evaluating resumes. And, it's your resume though, in the end. So you take which advice resonates with you, and, you put your resume together accordingly. Okay. So if you're in a major, or you graduated with a major that has more of a creative slant to it, if it's communication and media, or any of the creative industries, then maybe color is something that you may like and want to put in there. But if for healthcare or business, or the industries that are not as creative and just kind of more focused on the work that you're doing, and they don't allow as much creativity when it comes to these kinds of things, then I say stick with black only. And then the other thing you want to keep in mind when you're putting together your resume, to use bold and italics and underlining for emphasis, as you emphasize like your job title, where you work, the dates, all of that. Okay. Okay, so you also want to make sure that you keeping your resume consistent and clean. And so that means like that your margins should be the same throughout your entire document. It also means that each subheading, title, location, date, etc., should be done in the same way, aligned, and have the same emphasis. So if you have your job titles in italics, make sure every job title is in italics. If your locations are bold or something, then bold all of them. If your dates are underlined or something, then underline all of them. So you just want to make sure that whatever you're going to do to one entry, that you do that the same way in each of your entries for each of your positions. And then typically you don't want to use graphics or photos. Again, that varies. Creative industries, you have more leeway there. But in terms of photos, particularly, like, social media has obviously taken over our lives in many ways. And so we all have profile photos in our social media, LinkedIn, and, all the other social media. So I think that at some point, photos are going to be used on resumes, but we're not there yet. So I do not recommend using photos on resumes. There are some exceptions, like, for acting resumes, for instance, for, students who major in drama and have an acting resume, then you do put a photo on your resume. Or for some reason, the real estate industry tends to put photos on resumes as well. So there are some exceptions like that, but, for the most part, no photos. And then you also do want to use bullet points, and you want to keep it neat and easy to read quickly. And that's why the bullet points are good. And they also just kind of make your resume look more professional. Okay, so verb tenses and variety, connotation and quantity, achievements and results, summary, buzzwords, and overall impression are what we're going to talk about. But I first want to go to samples. So let me do a new share, and let's take a look at these different samples that I have here. So this first sample is the reverse chronological sample. And you see contact information there, obviously at the top. And if you notice there, the contact information, there's no street address there. Now, it used to be on resumes, we all used to put street address, but that has gone by the wayside. And in recent years, street addresses aren't being put on there anymore. So I suggest if you have a street address on your resume, take it off. Just put city and state. And you can put zip code too if you'd like, or just city and state, because I think mainly it's because of identity theft, really. Like, it's not as safe anymore to have such specific information out there about yourself. So it's best to not have your street address on there. So then down to the first section there, the summary, which we'll talk about the summary more, but the summary is an important part of the document because it really, is the first section, if you have a summary on your resume, that the employer will see. And it's important to make sure that you include really relevant keywords in your summary. And we'll discuss that more. But then you see we come to the education section here, and you see like this heading, education, it's all caps, bold, underlined. And over like CUNY School of Professional Studies is regular type, but the degree is done in italics. And it's the same way for PACE. This is regular type. Bachelor of Fine Arts and Commercial Dance is italicized. And then over on the right here, the locations and the dates are bold, regular type. So it all matches, it's all consistent, which gives it a better look. And then we have bullet points here as well, bullet pointing out all the information. And then you see the next section that you come to, experience, also all caps bold, underlined. And then, you would do name of organization, title, dates, bullet points. And every bullet point here starts with an action verb too. And one thing to keep in mind also is for any present job that you have, your action verbs should be in the present tense, because it just makes it a lot easier for employers to follow your resume when they're doing the quick read. So you just manage, work, assist, implement. Then for any previous jobs you've had, your action verbs would go in the past tense. So authored, wrote, worked. So you just want to make sure that you do that. And then let me go to the next page. And on the next page, one of the things that uh, you'll notice, well, we've got skills, activities, and interests here as the last section, right? And it's broken up by technical and activities and interests. And you can do it any way you want. You could put technical, languages, activities, and interests. There are various ways that you do that, whatever's most relevant for you. But also, you see this resume does go on to a page 2, and at the bottom, it has first name, last name, page 2. So what I'm going to recommend is that if you have a 2-page resume, you should definitely identify your second page with your name and page 2. And that's in case an employer prints out your resume and the pages get separated. It's just really helpful for them to be able to know the page belongs to you. Okay. Now, this next example of the reverse chronological is the 1-pager. And this one, again, does not have the street address on it and the contact information. There's a summary there as well. And then this one decided to do selected skills next with keywords in there, and then education, and then experience. Okay. And again, you're going to get copies of these so that you'll be able to look at them more closely. And then I want to show you the functional format, which is different than these reverse chronological formats. So for the functional format, you, of course, will still start with your summary, because the summary, if you're going to have a summary on your resume, it does need to be your first section. And so this summary is bullet pointed. And then instead of an experience section or education, instead next you get relevant skills. And so what you do is you break out your relevant skills into subcategories. And in this case, we've got sales and new account development, customer relations, advertising, marketing, and distribution, and then responsibilities that you've had within those areas. So you'd break it out into the areas that you have and bullet point the different responsibilities or accomplishments. And then after that, you would list your employment history. And you don't have bullet points under that to describe the jobs because they're not relevant. It's really the relevant skills above that you're trying to emphasize, because if you're a career changer or you don't have much experience or you've been away from the workplace, you're de-emphasizing this employment history, and instead you're highlighting your relevant skills above. So you would just list them, you put the date, and you'd put title and where it is that you work or have worked. And here's education here. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so for content and word choice, so for verb tenses and variety, as I was saying, like your current job, present, and previous jobs, past tense is the easiest way to do that. And then making sure that each bullet point begins with the strongest action verb. So do that. Now, responsibilities include is not an adverb, so make sure that none of your bullet points begin with responsibilities include. You just want to go right into the action verb, okay? You also want to avoid any repetitive words, phrases, or sentences, especially right after one another. And what I would say is that the most common action verbs used on resumes is assisted. So you don't want like 3 bullet points in a row that say assisted, 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 right? So one hint I'll give you is you can vary assisted by like, one bullet point assisted, the next one says provided assistance with, and then the next one can say coordinated. So, just find different ways of expressing your action verbs. And then you also want to use descriptive words, but don't overdo it. Always be honest in describing what your responsibilities are and have been. So for connotation and quantity, you want to make sure that you're choosing positive phrases as you're describing, what your responsibilities are, to evoke a favorable impression. Add in any numbers or percentages or dollar amounts that add to, because they add to any credibility, that you have in terms of whether you've increased profitability or you've met sales goals, or whatever it is that you've done. You've supervised a certain number of people, whatever it is, you definitely want to be adding in those specifics. And you also want to make sure that your resume is very achievement and results oriented. So always indicate any promotions or expanded responsibilities that you've had. So if you were promoted from a coordinator to a manager at an organization, you can always list out, put your manager in the title position, do the bullet points to describe your manager position, and then your last bullet point can say promoted from coordinator position. You can do it that way. But just sure that you indicate, you can even put that, and you can also then still indicate your responsibilities for the coordinator position and list that below with bullet points, depending on how much space you have. But always add in those little things that are outside of your job description that you do take care of, and make sure you describe any special projects you've managed, ideas and solutions you've implemented, and the way it made any sort of difference, whether it was cost savings, increased efficiency, anything along those lines. And include any managerial duties, even if your title doesn't indicate it, especially if your title doesn't indicate it. So if you were assisting with hiring or training your colleagues, any aspect of performance management that you helped with, or scheduling, if you help schedule your colleagues' shifts, anything like that, make sure that you include those responsibilities in your bullet points. And then the summary. So the summary is useful for experienced professionals and for everyone, really. Think of your summary as your personal pitch, because it's really indicating like what you have to offer the employer in a very brief kind of way. So you want to make sure that for your summary that you include the most relevant information that you can in terms of skills and attributes. So the way I say to put together your summary is, when you're applying for a job, go to the job posting, look at it very specifically. You're going to want to customize your summary for each and every job that you apply for. And I know that sounds arduous and it sounds like a lot to have to do, but it's important because these online application systems, they program online applications to look for keywords in your resume and in your cover letters. And so the keywords need to be planted in your summary. So make sure, the way you can do that is to make sure that you go to your job posting that you're applying for, you look in the qualifications section of the job posting, and you see, what does it say? Which skill words are they using? What skill language? And then you specifically use some of those same skill words in your summary. And don't think, well, I need to use synonyms because I don't want them to think I'm copying exactly those words. And you're not going to copy it exactly as it's written in the job posting, but you are going to look for 3 or 4 of those skills mentioning that it's important for the candidate to have. And you're going to put those skill words within your summary so that when the online application is looking for the keywords, it knows to flag your resume because it's been programmed to do that. So make sure that you include those keywords. And because you are going to tweak and customize your resume for each job that you apply for, you have to have a really organized way of saving your resumes and your cover letters, really. So for instance, if I was going to apply for a career advisor job at Hunter College, right, I would save my resume after I customize my summary. I would save my resume and say Kelsey Richardson resume _ Hunter College, Kelsey Richardson cover letter _ Hunter College. So that's how I would save them. And then when Hunter College called me for an interview, I would know exactly which resume and which cover letter I had uploaded to their site. So just make sure, that you have that organized way of going about it so that you can easily identify them. So also your summary can include your objective, if you want it to, in the last part of the summary, that you're seeking an opportunity to contribute to an organization, or you're seeking an opportunity to obtain a certain type of position. But first, have that be the end of your summary, because it used to be that objectives were at the top of resumes, not summaries, but summaries have taken over. So definitely have it be a summary. And I think that part of the reason summaries took over is because employers really, they're more interested in a summary, because a summary talks about what your most relevant skills are and your most relevant attributes. And that's what they want to hear, is what can you do for them? And then if you talk about the objective of what you're seeking at the end of that summary, the last sentence, that's fine. As long as most of that summary is about what you can offer them in terms of your skills and attributes. So in terms of buzzwords, make sure that you are very industry specific as you word your resume, whatever language you're using, that you are conscious of using the correct terms for everything. Be careful with acronyms. You may think, well, everybody knows these acronyms, but not all employers do. It just kind of depends on how their company specializes or how their organization is specialized. So you want to spell things out, and you can put the acronym in parentheses. And again, like taking the cues from the job postings, because you want to make sure that you definitely take those cues and plant, as many of the keywords as you possibly can, and keep your skills as relevant as possible that you are including in there. Because again, when employers are deciding who to interview and the resumes are flagged through your online systems, then they look over them and they decide and they narrow it down, who are we going to interview? And those resumes that look most relevant to the job they're hiring for, those are the people that they're going to choose to interview. So you want that person to be you. Okay, so then overall impression for your resume. You want to make sure that you print out your resume, like when you're doing a whole refresh, and you're revamping your resume, you want to make sure that you proof it really, really carefully. And one of the best ways to do that is to not just proof it on your computer screen, but also to print a hard copy and do a proofing that way, because sometimes you can catch errors like on a hard copy that you wouldn't see on the screen, or vice versa. So you just want to make sure you're proofing ways for a final review. Go over it out loud also. That can be really helpful, to read it out loud as you're proofing it, because if you hear yourself saying the words, then sometimes you can catch a mistake that you might not visually just looking at. And then another way that can really help you catch anything is reading from the bottom to the top, instead of, normally we obviously read from the top to the bottom of things, but we can easily go into automatic pilot when we're doing that. So a way to just kind of shake it up a little bit, yourself more present as you're proofing, is you start at the bottom of your resume and then you go back, go up to the top, work your way back up to the top, so that you can just focus in and pay attention more, and make sure you have another set of eyes look at your resume, because it's really important to make sure that you don't have any errors. If an employer sees mistakes, misspellings, grammar, if your resume looks sloppy in any way, then the employer worries, like if they hired you, how dedicated would you to the job that they'd hire you for if you don't even take the time to make sure that your resume is error-free and that it has a very professional presentation to it. So just really make sure you take a lot of time to do that with your resume. Okay, so make sure you're putting any questions you have in the chat so that I can make sure that I address those. So let's touch on the cover letter. So for cover letters, you want to make sure that when you're including a cover letter, that it is targeted and specific, and that you're not using form templates either for this. So again, the way to make it targeted and specific is to go to that job posting and look at the qualifications section. What are they asking for? What skills are most important for this job? And then focus your cover letter on those skills, okay? Cover letter can make or break answers, because sometimes employers will make it optional for you to include a cover letter or not. And I always say, if they make it optional, take extra time to include it, because it can make the difference between whether they decide to choose you for an interview or someone else. Because sometimes they make it optional, like as sort of like a mini test, because they want to see like who goes above and beyond and who will make sure that they really give everything an extra effort. And those people that decided to submit an optional cover letter, tend to be people who would go above and beyond. So it can really make or break your chances. So definitely, I recommend you do that. And you want to make sure your cover letter shows your personality, your passions. Your cover letter does tend to prove that you're a serious candidate because you've written it out and you're focusing it on that particular position. And it also serves to help prepare you for a future interview. Because when you're called for that interview, one of the things you want to do the night before to help yourself prepare for the interview is review your resume again, and also review your cover letter and read it over. And what did you emphasize as you wrote to them? And make sure you have that in the back of your mind as you go to your interview. So let's look at the cover letter samples. Let me go back to the sample document. And I'm going to show you two cover letters because we have two in here. This first cover letter is what I call the modern version of the cover letter. And it's because it has bullet points in the middle. Like it starts off with 2 paragraphs, a short one, and then, a bit of a longer one. And then you've got bullet points here that focus on your responsibilities or achievements from your current position, from your academics. Another bullet point can mention specifically relevant academic projects if that's relevant, or projects that you've done in your positions. And remembering to use, numbers, quantities, all of that to show your impact. But the reason I call it the modern version of the cover letter is because, a lot of employers do say they like it when cover letters have bullet points to them because it's a much faster read for them. They could kind of really skim it and focus in on the bullet points because they know that you'll put the most relevant information in the bullet points. So this is one way that you can do it. Also, up in the greeting here, dear, so obviously if you know their name, you're going to their name, right? But dear hiring manager is what you should use if you do not have their name. So it used to be to whom it may concern, or dear sir/madam would be the traditional way to address a cover letter if you don't know who to address it to, if they don't give you the contact person's name. But now, for whatever reason, the employers really like dear hiring manager, so definitely go with that. The only exception I would say for that is if you know it's going to be a search committee, you could say dear search committee or dear hiring committee. That's fine. But if you don't know for sure that it's going to be a committee, then dear hiring manager is what you want to go with. All right. And then the next cover letter is what I call more the traditional 3-paragraph style. And that one is just as you would imagine, 3 paragraphs. On computer, I know you can move a little faster than this. Sorry. Okay. So it starts dear hiring manager, and first paragraph is I'm writing in response to the job posting for whatever position it is. In the middle, as my resume indicates, I've just completed a Bachelor of Science degree in business at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. My skills can closely match what you're seeking in candidates for this position. So you would, detail out your skills. And then the last paragraph is where you would, for an opportunity to interview. So I'd appreciate the opportunity to meet with you at your convenience to discuss my background and qualifications in greater detail. I can be reached at, and then just reiterating your contact information and thanking them for time and consideration. All right. And the other thing I should mention is the closing of a cover letter. Sometimes people put regards or best regards or various things, but I usually suggest, just be traditional with the cover letter because it is a business letter. Sincerely is just kind of like the ultimate business letter closing that's, all employers, tend to really like. So just say sincerely and then have your name there. Okay. All right. So let me go back to our PowerPoint. Okay. So, so in your cover letter writing, again, you want to set yourself apart, right? So one of the ways that you can do that is by, just making sure that you emphasize not just your most relevant skills, but also if you have a really strong work ethic, to mention that. If there are any particular projects that you worked on that distinguish you, to mention that. So just make sure, that you focus it. And you're citing your the job requirements and how you're qualified, and the bullet points can also make that part easier. That if you sometimes people literally put in those bullet points, you've mentioned this responsibility for the position, and I have experience with this, so they'll specifically mention the job requirement and the qualification that they have, and you can do that too. But make sure that you are showing your enthusiasm for the position and the organization. And one of the best ways to show your enthusiasm for the specific organization and position is to tie it to their mission in some kind of way. If their mission is inspiring to you, you can mention that in that middle paragraph or your last bullet point. If you're doing bullet points, you can mention that you really resonate with their mission of providing assistance to students, with disabilities, or whatever their mission is. You can definitely mention that that's something that you really would want to be a part of. And then salary information is the other thing that you want to make sure that you would include salary information, not what you've been making, but it's salary information of what you're looking for if they ask you that. Because sometimes what they'll do in the job posting is they'll say, also indicate, what your salary requirements are. And if they do that, then you can just put that in your last paragraph of your cover letter, and you just say, my salary requirements are, and then you just put, usually it's about a $5,000 range, and you would do research for that. You can look on salary.com. And if you are New York based, and the organization is in New York that you're looking for, they'll need to list like what the salary range is for the position anyway, because it's now a new law. But if you're located, in a state where that's not a requirement, then you might not have any idea what the salary would be for the position that you're applying for. And if they're asking you what your salary requirements are, again, just do your research. Just look on salary.com, what's typically the pay for this particular position in this particular part of the country, and put down around a $5,000 range. And the reason you want to do that is because you don't want to just put one number, because one number can look inflexible. So you want to make sure that you have a range there, so that you look flexible, but yet, you give them what your salary requirements are. All right. Okay, so follow-up and thank you letters. And there is a follow-up thank you letter in those documents that you're going to receive a copy of. So you could definitely, take a look through that. I'm not going to take the time to go through that because I want to make sure I have time for your questions. So, but let's just touch on that. So are thank you letters necessary? Yes, they are. Absolutely. A thank you letter can definitely distinguish you from other candidates, because not all candidates will send one. And so usually you want to send it by email, not snail mail anymore. And you want to send it within 24 to 48 hours. And really what you're doing is you're thanking them again for their time, and then you're reiterating the skills that you have for the job. It's kind of like another opportunity to give a little bit of more of a plug for yourself and why you'd be great for the job. So definitely take a look at that sample. It's very helpful. And at the end of that thank you letter, usually you're asking for next steps, like, please let me know if you need any additional information from me, and if I can provide you with anything else. The references document is another one of these supplemental documents. And so for your references, don't ever just submit your references because employers are always collecting resumes, cover letters, like they get a lot of information. So unless they specifically ask you for references, just have them ready. Just have a separate document ready. Some I see some students and they think maybe they're supposed to include their references as part of their resume, and you don't want to do that. And make it an entirely separate document. And there's a sample, in those sample documents that you can see the format of. It just says references document at the top, and then usually you'll give 3 professional references. And those 3 professional contacts can be a combination of either it can be 2 employers and 1 professor. It can be 1 employer, 2 professors. It just kind of depends on who you think would speak most strongly about your qualifications for a particular position. So, and depending on how much work experience you have, and you just want to make sure you check with all of your contacts and your references before you actually would submit them to an employer once an employer's asked you, because you don't ever want a reference to be caught off guard by being contacted. So make sure that you do get the permission first. And again, providing these upon request only. So just remember that. No, just including them. Just, I'll just throw in the references too. No, definitely make sure that they've asked you for them, and then make sure you just have a document ready. You've already cleared it with your references so that you can provide it very quickly, but only provide it if it's asked for. Okay, and then online applications and profiles. So you just want to make sure that you are filling out any online application you're asked to complete, fill it out fully. Copying and pasting versus uploading. I usually recommend that you upload your documents as opposed to copying and pasting it in any of the fields, because if you can upload it, particularly as a PDF, PDF tends to preserve your formatting and it'll look best as the employers review it. So definitely uploading is the way to go if you can. And pay attention to all the details. Be as careful as possible on an online application, because you don't want any errors on there either. The last thing you want to do is have this error-free resume that you proofed and it's just fantastic, and then rush through an online application that has spelling errors and various things on it. So be careful with all of it, and be honest and forthcoming, answering all questions. Use your resume and references sheet as you're filling out an online application, so that you make sure that you have all of your information handy and available to be able to fill it all out. And include, again, any optional documents. So if they do have a cover letter optional, definitely do that. If you're applying for a position where writing is something that's important and they've said optional writing sample, then include a writing sample, And also just make sure that you update profiles regularly, particularly LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is the most important of the social media sites in terms of work world. So update your profile, make sure it is updated and well-proofed as well. Okay. All right. So now that we've covered Resume 101 and the supplemental documents, let's, any questions that anybody has. So let me go to the chat and see what we have going on in terms of questions. Okay. All right. Let me see. Okay, so we have a question here. If you've worked for the same company for over 20 years, do you list the name of the company with each position or just once? And that's one of the questions that it can really be done either way. It just kind of depends on how much space you're working with, like how much education you have, how much space that's going to take. Because in terms of the length of your resume, let me just say that 2 pages are just as good as 1 page now. All employers wanted 1-page resumes, but Thank goodness that has changed, and they're just as accepting as, with 2 pages. But you don't want to go over pages. So just make sure the maximum is 2 pages. So if you have enough space and it looks fine to you, then you could list the company each time, next to the name of the title, the title that you had for each position, and bullet point out each of them, and have obviously your dates next to each position that you were in for that period of time. But when you are more limited on space, it would be better to just put the company once and then have the positions underneath it, as kind of much more subheadings. So again, depending on the space that you're working with and also visually, like what appeals to you, then that's kind of how you would decide how to do that. Okay. All right. So let's see, next question. Which format is best to use for someone who's been on the job for more than 13 years? So I would say that the best format, I still think the best format to go with is reverse chronological, if that works for you. So if you are looking for a job that's relevant to the types of jobs that you've had, then if you've been on a job for 5 years or 13 years, it's best to go with reverse chronological. Now, one thing I should also say is that in terms of the time that you want to be putting on a resume, because employers do not expect you to, if you've been in the workforce a long time, they don't expect you to put every job you've ever had on there, of course. So generally, they say your resume should go back, around 10 years. But if you've been at a job for, if the job that you're in now, you've been at it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then obviously you don't just put one job on your resume. So just keep that in mind, that if you've been at your job for 13 years, you would put that job there with plenty of bullet points because you've been there a long time, obviously. And then you would do one more job back before that, so that you've got a representation of 2 jobs on there. Okay. And again, it's hard to answer some of these questions as specifically as I would if I'm physically looking at your resume. I can give you even more specific detail. So the next question is, can I put references available upon request on your resume? So I'm glad that that you asked this, because now that used to be on every resume, references available upon request, but you'll notice it was not on the samples that I showed you and that you're getting the copy of, because no one puts that anymore. It's assumed. Employers know that you're going to provide references upon request. So don't even bother wasting space by putting that on there anymore. And it also, if you put it on there, you don't look as much like a modern job seeker, because modern job seekers, don't put that anymore. It's kind of like if you have an objective at the top of your resume, you don't look as much like a modern job seeker either, because summaries are at the top of resumes now. So don't put that on there. Okay, I wouldn't suggest that. Okay, so next question. What if you don't want to inform current employer that you're looking? So yeah, I usually suggest that you don't inform your current employer that you're looking for a new position, unless there's some special circumstance, like your company's going out of business, or people are being laid off, and it's sort of like a more open kind of environment that everybody's looking for a new opportunity. But barring something extreme like that, it's usually best not to let an employer know that you're looking, because even the best employers will be offended, that, like, why would you leave me? Like they don't really like to face the reality that, their current employees are going to at some point be moving on. So you would, do it under the radar, and any references that you would ask for references of previous employers, not a current employer. You could ask for a reference of somebody you work closely with at your organization who is not your boss. If you trust them, they wouldn't tell anyone else there. So you would have to be really careful with that, but people do that all the time. Okay, so there's another question. Where do you explain your gaps in time there? Okay, so that's tricky about explaining your gaps because it depends on what your gaps are for. Were you away raising children or taking care of a sick parent, or did you travel? There are various reasons, obviously, that you might have a gap. So it depends on what it is, because with certain types of gaps, you can put an entry in there that indicates what it was. And then with others, you might refer in your cover letter to just being away from the workplace, but you might be vague about it. Again, like I would have to have specifics in order to really advise you on that, but there are definitely ways to deal with gaps. So definitely if you have a gap on your resume and you're working on refreshing it, definitely, like a resume review appointment so you can get assistance with that. Okay, next question is, if someone has been in the workforce for over 20 years, still need to include internships in college or earlier. So what I would say to that is it depends on a few things. It depends on whether you have enough space on there and whether the internships in college were relevant to the type of job that you would go for. So if the internships are relevant because they're in the area or related area to the next job that you're seeking, then it is important for them to see that you did those internships in college, even if it was, over 20 years ago, that's fine. It's still relevant. But if it's not relevant, or if you just, in those 20 years, you just have so much other experience that's more relevant and more important, then you do not need to include them. So it's going to vary. It's really going to depend on what your particular circumstances are. Okay, so next question is, when adding bullet points to a position, is it only one sentence per bullet point, or can you add 2 sentences onto a bullet point to help cement the experience? And so what I would say for this question is that there are various ways that you can do the bullet points. A lot of times people do it 1 sentence per bullet point, but that takes up a lot of space. So sometimes when you're trying to manage the space, you want to do a bullet point to lead off a paragraph that has 3 or 4 sentences in it. So you can definitely do multiple sentences in a bullet point. They just need to be related sentences. So you just need to stay, within the same type of responsibility that you're describing. And then you just move on to another type of responsibility that you'd be describing. But absolutely, you can have multiple sentences in the bullet point. All right. And next question. Is it okay to just list jobs after graduating from college? Yes. So again, that's sort of like the other question that was asked about internships from college and everything. Yeah, you can just list jobs after you graduate from college. That's fine if there are enough of them and it shows enough of your experience. But if you had jobs during college that are relevant or internships, then you might want to include those, depending on the space and how much other experience you have. So you should just kind of, see what's relevant and what kind of space it takes up on your resume and how it adds to your application. Next question, are you required to have a LinkedIn profile? So you're not required, but I highly, highly, highly suggest that you do have a LinkedIn profile. And that's just because when it comes to LinkedIn, employers just constantly tell us in career services that they use LinkedIn to look for candidates. And not only do they use it to look for candidates, but when you're applying online for their positions, when they have their online applications program to flag resumes, they do that. And then once the resumes are flagged and they're looking through to narrow down who they might want to interview, sometimes as they're trying to fully narrow down who they're going to interview, they will decide based on LinkedIn profiles. So let's say they're trying to interview 10 people and they've got 15 in the pile of resumes, right? So they might go, okay, let me start looking at LinkedIn profiles and let's see, are they represented on LinkedIn? Do they have a profile, first of all? And okay, yes, they do. And is that profile consistent and does it look professional? Then, but if you don't even have one, then sometimes they'll just go, oh, they're not even on here. Nope, sorry. If they don't even want to bother to take the time to have a professional LinkedIn profile, then I'm not going to bother to interview them. So you can really miss out on opportunities if you don't have that LinkedIn profile. So I highly, highly recommend that you have one. All right. So next question. If the gap is education, would that suffice? Because it would be represented in the body of the resume. Yeah, definitely. If the gap is education, absolutely. You just have to make sure that your dates are clearly indicated in the education section. And in your cover letter, you can also, mention that in a way, as you're mentioning that you completed your degree, you can word it in such a way where it's obvious that you decided to go back to school to get your master's or finish your bachelor's or whatever it was, and then you return to the work. So there's a way to make it even clearer through the cover letter. But yes, absolutely, education gaps are absolutely fine. And so we have time for one more question here. And so this question is, how detailed should one be about health issues when explaining a gap on a cover letter or during an interview? So I definitely would not be detailed about describing a health issue in a cover letter. Absolutely not. The cover letter is just focused on what skills you have for the position and any responsibilities that you've had in your jobs that relate to the job you're applying for. So cover letter should just be focused on that. But in an interview, if you were to bring up a health issue that's relevant to what the employer is asking you about, then you would not be very specific. You would, obviously it's up to you, but just in terms of, I would advise that you be vague, and just say, there was a health issue, that I was dealing with during that time period, and so that was that there's a time on my resume, that where there is a gap, but then I took this new position, and then just go right into talking about the position that you took after the gap. And focus what you're talking about on that. So you do not want to go into much detail because it's just not really appropriate in a situation where you're in this professional interview meeting with an employer. So it just protects you more. It's none of their business really to know the intricacies of a health issue that you dealt with. It's just more like you acknowledge that there was a health issue and that there was a gap, and then you focus what you talk about on what skills you have. Okay. All right. Well, you guys had incredibly great questions. Thank you for all of those questions. And thank you for participating in this webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time out because I know that it's not easy. Everyone's very busy with school, with work, with family, with all kinds of responsibilities. And so thank you for that. And, definitely make sure, again, that you take the time to refresh your resume and do the best you can with it and have another set of eyes look at it. And I wish you the best going forward. So thanks again for spending the time and have a wonderful evening, everyone.